Okay, what am I doing?
It's live.
Okay. Good morning. We do still have one with the exiting and okay. All right, so good morning. It is Wednesday, February 26th. This is the Natural Resources and Energy. And we are kicking off this morning with folks from DEC, Peter Flom, and I forgot her name.
That's all right, Bethany Sargent.
Bethany Sargent. Do you have new language for S29?
We do.
Okay,
Sure.
amazing. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think I have it yet. Is that correct? You haven't sent it?
Well, just barely.
Oh, just barely. I've got to log in here.
They have a copy.
Amazing.
We have
That's so good.
copies as well, Chair Watson, if that would be
Nice.
helpful.
Yes, that would be great. I like paper.
I like paper when they're marking.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right. I feel like there's sometimes.
Oh, and you have that. I'm the one that suggested. Here,
Thank you. Oh, no Senator Bondar's yet this morning?
he is here.
Okay, very good.
He's busy.
There enough. Sorry, I gotta get myself organized here. Okay. So I'm gonna be this is okay.
Yes, the
Yes.
confusion abounds around this bill. I can level set us here,
Okay.
if you would like.
Sure, yes, go ahead, take it away.
Perfect, thank you. For the record, Eva Plum, Director of the Watershed Management Division at Vermont DEC. And we were in the other day, as you know, reviewing at times draft 3.2 and at times draft 3.3. And again, apologies for that confusion. We had sent in a markup with agency comments on 3.2. That markup is on the website. It's referred to as the Charles Martin version because Charles was the one, our deputy secretary was the one that sent it over to the committee. We, as a result of testimony and discussion with the committee the other day, we made further markups to that version. So again, we're still the matrix we're operating from is still 3.2, but with additional markups meant to address some of the concerns that we had expressed the other day and then subsequent conversation with the committee. So that's what we handed out in paper form this morning, and that's what we provided at the last second to Jude to put up on the website. So we're operating again from a markup of 3.2. 3.3 is out there, but to try to minimize the confusion, we're still on the base document of 3.2. Comparing the base of 3.2 and 3.3, there's not a lot of difference substantively between those two versions. So if you're okay, we will operate. I can run through this morning our additional markups on 3.2, which is what you have in paper form. And I just wanted to start by once again saying that we recognize the important balance that's necessary between maintaining safe roads and safe surfaces in the winter, while also managing the adverse effects of chlorides on waters. And it's a challenge, particularly in the smaller, more heavily developed watersheds with lots of roads and impervious surfaces. That's where the challenge is most acute. And that's where we're seeing some of our currently impaired chloride waters. In fact, we have a good remote sensing based model that we can use that's very good at predicting when there's a lot of built surface, a lot of impervious surface, a lot of roads and parking lots in a very small watershed. In other words, not a lot of dilution capability in the water. It's probably going to be a chloride impaired water, and then we can target that with additional monitoring to verify that fact, etc. It's what do we do about it, and trying to manage, optimize that chloride application is really the essence of this bill, and I think that's what we support very much. We think that this step in terms of addressing the commercial applicators, again, we are very good partners with V-Trans and their work in terms of optimizing salt application on a state highway system. We are making progress working with municipalities, and there's mention in here about additional training that will occur through the Vermont Local Roads Program. And then also addressing that the missing piece right now, being able to optimize salt application by commercial applicators. So again, we strongly support the underlying basis for this bill. We do remain concerned about three things in the bill. The tracking and reporting requirements as they were currently drafted and as I spoke about the other day, but we do recognize the points that were made by the committee the other day in discussion. We do recognize that it would be good to have annual reporting by the commercial applicators in terms of the total amount of salt used over the course of a winter, in addition to the more detailed tracking of weather conditions and applications per surface that they will be maintaining in their records. But in annual reporting and then being able to track, hopefully, the ongoing minimization of chloride by the applicators in terms of annual reporting makes sense, and we can support that. The other major, the second major area of concern was in monitoring, and we've now prepared and we will suggest some substitute language for monitoring that the agency and administration can commit to. And then thirdly, the covering of salt and sand storage facilities, not only those located within 100 yards of a receiving water, but just throughout the state, that those costs are likely to be very considerable. And we're going to suggest pushing those dates off a bit to give the state time to both assess and then actually be able to help pay for the cost of constructing those facilities. So those are the three general areas I'll talk about. And if you want, I can walk through those major changes shown here. So on page 1, at the bottom of page 1 of the draft that you're now looking at, there's a change to commercial salt applicator. We believe that that's the supervision of others who apply is appropriate under the master salt applicator category that you have in the bill. So there's individual commercial salt applicator, meaning the individual who does it themselves, and then the master salt applicator, which is not currently a definition, but we feel should be a definition, would be, and we suggested that at the top of page 2, taking that from the language in the bill and putting it up front as a definition. So these are more clarifications than significant change. And yet we talked about the other day, pulling out municipal salt applicators from the training envisioned by this bill, and we'll have language later in here talking about how we will partner with V-Trans in terms of their local roads training and providing that training to municipalities. So throughout the document, then I'm now on page 3 of 12 and just explaining some of those strikeouts that you see there. Again, on page 4, striking out municipal salt applicators from this. We did on line 7 of page 4, we did go through and remove the required submission, but instead having applicators that have received the certification and want to benefit from the limited liability provisions, maintaining those records on site for their, potential use if they need to, defend their actions in a liability situation rather than having us managing all of those records. But we do, so some of the other tweaks on line 18, applying for certification every other year rather than annually, we feel is sufficient for the purposes of this certification.
That's a quick.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, so just on that spot, I see on line 18, you say apply every other year, and you cross it out to the secretary. Who are they applying to? Is it clear from the previous language? On line 18.
I see where you are, and it's a great question,
If I-
Senator Harvey.
If I could speak to that, Bethany Sargent, Deputy Director of Watershed Management Division in Vermont EEC. So I think that's to clarify, depending on the scope of the third-party vendor contract, they could be managing the certification application. So it may be the third-party vendor, it may be the Agency of Natural Resources, depending on the operational costs and the scope of what that contract would entail.
Okay.
Then on page 5, line 5, to the issue that I spoke of, interesting, other strikeout, didn't read it here, but, on line 5, a new D would be that certified salt operators shall submit an annual summary of total winter salt usage to the Secretary of Natural Resources. We agree that's a reasonable and appropriate way of tracking the use by various commercial operators. It's still gonna be a very inexact figure, because if Bob's plowing service suddenly takes on 10 new parking lots this year, Bob is gonna show increased salt use. So I mean, it's still trying to, the spirit of this bill and the intent, and I think the training that will be required are an enormous and important necessary step forward. But trying to track those results is the proverbial needle in the haystack. You know, whether it's, the tons, thousands of tons of salt imported to the state each year. I mean, it's a slippery.
So, sorry to interrupt, one of the metrics that came up, I forget if it was New York, I think it was New York actually. They had a metric that was like tons of salt per lane mile. And just thinking about even in a parking lot, right, like you're spreading it. I thought that was a very interesting metric.
It is.
To consider how much. That would account for like, well, you took on 10 new parking lots.
It would.
So anyway, that might be too like in the weeds right now, but yeah.
I think AOT does that. I think we should have AOT.
Oh, they.
Are you the AOT guy in the room?
So yeah,
He's the AOT guy.
yes.
Pardon me, Wes.
Sounds like AOT measures everything.
Exactly. It seems like they already measure that for, so I don't know if municipalities and private.
Go ahead.
I'm just not bothered by the fact it's exact. I think that the fact that we get that information, that we can also get total salt imported. Both inexact, but over the course of 10 years, will the tell if we're going up or down. And there will be peaks and valleys, but there's still then lines you draw through the middle, and at some point, it'll give us information.
Yeah, right, it's a place to start,
Information.
yeah.
But they did close out the salt imported for.
Yeah.
Okay, as long as you're on it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I wonder if we could create. I'm getting ahead of myself in terms of markup, but keeping something like D, but then adding something that's like, and any other measures that the, department feels would be useful for measuring the success of the program.
That would be,
Yeah, right, well, exactly, like, well, over time.
that would be great.
So,
Yes.
I like having this as a place to start, but recognize there may be other metrics, so,
Right.
cool.
And we recognize the concern over metrics. We just, there is a lot of variability in this space, and I think the most important first step, and I know I sound like a broken record perhaps, but this commercial, standing up the commercial applicator training, and then the quid pro quo of the limited liability provision, I think is an enormous first step. As we spoke about the other day, we will be, I think, the 4th state in the country to do this. And so we're at the tip of the initiative here, but it's a really important initiative.
We should have said iceberg because our.
I was gonna go there, Senator Hardy. So in the paper version that you're all looking at, the original D that starts on line 7, that entire section is shown as struck. the electronic version, for whatever reason, the electronic demons does not show it as struck, but we will fix that and resubmit it. So our proposal, as shown in the paper version, is to strike all of small d underneath the new d that we put in. So it's correct on the paper version if you're following along there.
Thanks to like the color fade. Yeah, that's very, it's pretty.
Thank our temperamental printer.
Yeah,
So I think,
yes, go ahead.
so before we move on, you did strike the amount of salt annually imported and remind me or us, was that simply because you think it's not valuable or is it for other reasons? 'Cause I think it would be valuable, even though it's imperfect as it would be. But what's the reason you struck it?
Two reasons, Senator Baumgart's. For the value of it, because of the total tonnage that's hauled into the state, and frankly, the initially relatively small reductions we're gonna see as a result of regulating the commercial applicator, because of the variability of winters, because of the variability of when that's hauled in and how long it's stockpiled for, and then finally, the difficulty. We still haven't been able to put our finger on the importers or regulation of the importers. So both in terms of the inexactness of that number and the difficulty in collecting that information, where at this time, recommending not including those metrics, but instead looking at the operators themselves and their usage, the certified operators and their usage of salt on an annual basis.
Okay, and then just, I don't want to take time, but and the reason you think, I'm not, it's coming back to me now, because you think you have no mechanism for things.
That's correct. Currently, we have no mechanism. So with D struck, then that brings us to the limited liability provisions, which is line 7 on page 6. And there we again gone through, and because we will be doing the training of the municipal salt operators, of applicators separately and differently. We start that from here at this time. And that goes on, that continues on page 7. Page 8, and getting somewhat to the point that we raised a second ago, Bill Watson, at the top of page 8, starting on line 2, setting forth the ability of the secretary to also add requirements as necessary to help track that usage. And again, we're at we're sort of at step 1 of this process, and I think we're going to learn a lot more after we stand up this program and start training operators, and frankly learn from what other states are doing. States tend to look at each other and what are they doing in Wisconsin? How is this working? What about in New Hampshire? What are they doing in Vermont? We see that a lot. Vermont, in terms of water resource management initiatives, we're at the leading edge of a lot of those, and we get a lot of calls, and in turn share information with other states as well. So having that ability to be able to add other requirements as we become more conversant in this area will be important. Continuing down on page 8, again, the concerns over cost and timing of the coverings or moving the piles is certainly a much easier initiative. Those that are within 100 yards, I would imagine in most cases that will be the choice. The management choice is to move the piles, covering all piles in the state by 2035 is a significant concern in terms of the unknown costs and funding sources that are mentioned there.
Yeah, go ahead.
But if you cross out 3, you remove have you not removed the incentive to move the piles? Because if you left 3 intact, the easy fix would be move the piles.
And we would be okay with that.
So potentially leave 3.
Leave the part of 3 that addresses piles that are within, the 100 yards is a proxy for a range of impact on the surface water. Moving or covering those, all facilities in the state, regardless of location. There are a lot of towns that maintain very large, you probably have seen them, salted sand piles. The total cost to the state in terms of doing that, still without that baseline information of what those costs will be and where those funds may come from, be they put on the municipality or, if there is a state funding source that can assist in that, we're concerned with that at this point.
I think I'm confused, Senator Bondarts. Can you just help me understand what your 3 and 4 seem almost the same to me, and there's probably some subtle thing I'm missing that, but the 3 would require them, all the parties to cover those piles. And your argument is if they have to cover them and that's expensive, then they'll just move them.
Which I'm saying is at least better.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood
Yeah.
your argument. And what's the difference between 3 and
Sand.
4? Oh,
4 is sand, and so sand 4 is about not.
well, this says salt and sand mixtures on
Yeah, it does.
both of them.
And I think that was fixed in draft 3.3, but it's our understanding that the intent of number 4 is that the storage of sand that's not mixed with salt, that's within 100 yards, would contain runoff, so they'd be managed in a way that the sand's not running off into the water body, is our understanding of number 4, and that's a reasonable requirement. Number 3 does 2 different things to your question, Senator Hardy. It requires those that are within 100 yards to be either moved or covered. And then the second part of it, and the part that raises considerable concern, is all other facilities, regardless of their location, must be under cover on or before 2035. So in 10 years, every salt and sand pile, they have.
I didn't get that, I didn't see the not mixed, and that was the thing. But I'm wondering, to Senator Bondart's point, is if we say moved or covered, and if that would make it more clear.
I think if they're not within 100 yards, they would not need to cover. So I think the implication is.
Right, but if they are within 100 yards, cover them, so either
Correct.
move them further away.
Correct.
Or cover them, whichever is cheaper or
Correct.
more desirable.
Correct.
Moved at least 100 yards away.
Yeah, or more.
Right, yeah.
And in a lot of cases, right, the town, for whatever reason, over time, town municipal facilities have located in, I'm aware of a number of situations where they've located right next to rivers. And, some of them unfortunately have now, had to move or had to be reconstructed because the river has moved and has started to take the facility, so.
Oh.
A lot of the municipal salt sheds too are just telephone poles stuck in the ground and
Yeah.
so they're probably in. If they have to get moved, that wouldn't be, I mean, it's gonna be an expense.
It'll be an expense, but over a given time, maybe they can start, identify a new location where they have municipal land.
Yeah, you're gonna
Start
get 10
to
years to do
stockpile, yeah.
Move them in June,
Yeah.
after they've used them.
Right,
Right.
Well, I get it,
Piles
yeah,
down.
let them use that down and
You
then.
can take that.
yeah. Oh, yeah, good.
I'm just thinking of a situation I have in, I don't even know if they're within 100 yards, but they might be. We have a salt pile, a sand pile. But. Where any runoff would go, the state has done a big project to put in a system to capture any runoff.
Mhm.
would in a situation like that, would they be exempt from having to cover?
The number 4,
Yeah,
where if it's only sand, and a lot of municipalities to allow that pile to be worked during the winter will mix salt with the sand to prevent the pile from freezing up solid, especially when we get a rain event and then subsequent freezing temperatures. So a lot of sand piles do have salt mixed in them. If it's a true sand pile, intercepting the flow at the base of the pile and, not allowing that movement of the sand to waters is an important step, and that, that would cover that which is called out in 4. If it's salt that's moving, because it will be, it's soluble, it will be in the water, coming up with a best management practice to defeat that solubilized salt is near impossible. So, it's probably the practice that you refer to, Senator Beck, is probably the, controlling the sand, movement of the sand.
okay, thank you.
It's a good word, solubilize. Sorry, little skepticism. Also, I just want to do a quick time check. I know we're getting close to the end of this, but
I'm almost done.
okay, you're amazing, thank you.
At the bottom of page 9, this is the municipal language that we worked in cooperation with AOT on. Adding this, that on or before November 1st of 26, the secretaries of the 2 agencies shall identify and make changes to the Vermont local roads curriculum needed to support the muni salt applicators in meeting the purpose of this act.
I appreciate that this exists.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It needs to be bulked up a little bit.
I agree with that. I could see it adding a little bit more if you're, well, hopefully that works for you, but just to like flesh it out a little bit more.
I understand.
Yeah, fair enough. So
It's just a question that kind of comes back to what some of the Brett said. If one of these municipal complexes is on a 3-acre impervious surface disk, that mitigation, the program that they're gonna have to go through, that might be a good reason alone just to do that. So
You're exactly right, Senator Wood. Yes.
and we don't know how many of those municipal complexes are on their list. I don't want to probably figure it out.
We may have, I may be able to get you that information in terms of the towns that would be affected. Just some clarifying language around the secretary. If we are not able to, I'm on line 3 of page 10, sorry. If we're not able to attract a third-party vendor, which we think we will be able to, but as a fallback position, we may need to take that training on ourselves. In which case this provides for the secretary being able to charge fees necessary to be able to conduct that training. The monitoring language on line 14, we've replaced and.
Can I ask
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
question on that? So if you do find a third party vendor, the fees would be paid directly to the vendor and there wouldn't be state fees? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's what,
Okay.
that's the model that we've seen
Okay,
in use, but it's all subject to how we negotiate that contract with the vendor, whether or not they're able to collect fees. We don't want to make the fees for this work to be prohibitive for folks, again, because it is a voluntary program.
yeah,
We want to be able to encourage folks to be able to attend those trainings.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is to be determined once we, if this moves forward and when we do, go out for contracts to see what sorts of interest we attract and then negotiate those contracts. This just provide for either that all being dealt with by a third party vendor, or we could have a combination, a hybrid approach, or the state. The monitoring language, starting on line 14 of page 10 is we committed to, we tweaked and finessed the language some that it's the Vermont Water Quality standards that have the chronic or acute criteria within them. The secretary, will conduct the analyses and monitoring as necessary to characterize the level of impairment, assess significant sources in the contributing watershed for the development of an EPA approved total maximum daily load, a cleanup plan, which is similar to what we've done at Sunnyside Road in Colchester. We're suggesting that would be appropriate monitoring language, and then depending on the specific situation on the ground, different techniques would be used. And then just finally, in the interest of time, a small tweak in terms of page 11, line 13, the appropriation of funds, our FTE model right now is $150,000 per FTE. And then finally, to be able to contract to a third party in line 20, we've set forth $250,000 as a suggested path for what that contract would be with an organization like UDMC Grant or other entities that may want to bid, standing up to a one-time contract to develop the materials, the training, and to stand up that program with a third-party vendor. So we would propose a max of $250,000 as a contracting amount. And those are the changes.
Right.
We'll correct the electronic version and send it. Sorry, Jude. Back to Jude.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just one question, so if you're not soliciting bids until January of 26. I don't think you need the 250 in FY 26. Or you certainly don't need the full amount.
It's a great catch, Senator Hardy. In terms of carry forward and all of that, I'll talk to my business office. I think we'll need it when we do the bid.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we took it out originally was because I think it would fall into the next fiscal year.
And I don't know if we can carry those funds forward. The issue is that, as you know, well, monies that are appropriated by the legislature, don't become available to us typically until July 1st of any given year.
Right.
So we'll miss the January 26th. January 26th, if we move this funding forward into next year's cycle,
Yeah, I mean,
So
maybe
boss,
ask your
we're-
business people. maybe
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
great,
We'll-
because it just.
we'll figure out
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
details.
that's a
of how
good
to-
point. Okay. Super, yes, go ahead.
This is so minor, I sheepishly remember it, but on page 2, line 2. And is responsible for individuals who for compensation. Do we really? If somebody has 2 people working for them, they can, but if they have 1 person working for them, they can't. I mean.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good question, Senator, but yeah.
That's a good point.
I hate to offer him since he's not in the room, but I'm sure I go Grady has an answer for that. Yeah,
That's good.
but it is correct, so.
Okay, well, thank you. This
Thank
is
you.
fabulous. So thank you so much. I think this really gets at a lot of the concerns that we had. We'll continue to have another time where we mark these up. I have a feeling we'll probably be taking a lot of these suggestions. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
For sure. Okay, so we are moving on to and Marks, who is here with us virtually from Acorn. Welcome. And we're mentally switching gears here to S57, the standard offer and community solar bill. So thank you, team, for switching gears. And we'll do a quick round of introductions and then we'll turn it over to you.
Hi, Ben. It's Ruth. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Senator Terry Williams, from the Development District.
And Watson to the Washington District.
Seth Lumber from the Bennington Center District.
And then Caledonia.
And this is Jude, our committee assistant. All right, go ahead.
We can't hear him.
Oh, no, we can't hear you. I think you may be muted.
Yeah, he is.
Unmute. Thank
There
you. Thank you so much for making some time for me. I'm going to make some brief remarks about the community solar work that my organization, Acorn Renewable Energy Co-op, has been doing over the last 5 or 6 years. And then a couple of wordsmithing comments about the bill that I've had a look at in draft form with our particular process in mind. So the Acorn community solar projects have been organized around the idea of keeping our energy dollars local in Vermont. The community solar aspect is really about the wins for these projects, if you will, really redounding to Vermonters. So the towns that they're located in um, get to have tax revenue that they wouldn't otherwise, and in some cases, rent money for brownfield sites like closed landfills and the like. The off-takers to the project, who are ultimately the owners, get the advantages of being able to participate in the renewable energy revolution. Local installers and local builders are also get a win because they are engaged in constructing these things. And very simply, our idea is that people ought to be able to aggregate their resources to build solar projects together in one location. So if you have neighbors who hate solar and don't want to see it on your property, or if you live in the woods, or if you live on the wrong side of a mountain, or if your roof doesn't face the correct direction, or if you live in a condo and don't actually own your roof, all of these people have difficulty participating in solar, despite the fact that we have had net metering for 20 years or longer. And with the death of or rather the entry into a study period of the community of the net metering program, we've really entered into a kind of two-tiered system where folks who have won the housing lottery and have houses located in or property located in the right location can have solar, but everybody else who happens to live with tree cover in the wrong direction really can't. So that's my pitch is really that Vermonters are we're activist citizens. We very much want to know how much we can help in terms of individually with the climate challenges that the state and the country and frankly our planet face. And community solar is a great way to organize those resources and to build something that helps us all. I think that there are probably I don't have a number for you, but there are probably millions of dollars that have been freed up in federal tax credits that have flowed to people like me who've put in their own solar arrays. And there are certainly thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax credits that have flowed to the investors in our project. And I won't get too deeply into the weeds of how they're organized because I think I could, even over Zoom, I'd be able to see your eyes glaze over. But suffice it to say that we've devised a financial model that uses Vermont's small business offering exemption to allow us to sell interest in the entity that owns the solar array to ordinary Vermonters. So what we're selling is not panels on an array. We're selling units of interest in a limited liability company which owns the array. And then the folks who participate take a pro rata share of the energy generated by the array, and at the end of the year pay a pro rata share of the expenses associated with running the array. And that's really our overall business model. We figured out a way to do a public offering of membership interest without having to register with the SEC by making sure that only Vermonters are participating in this. So that's the basic concept. Now, the 2-year study model that we had for setting the solar adders and subtractors at the Public Utility Commission level eventually killed our model before the revisions to the bill last year. And what I mean by that is that what we're selling to people is effectively an investment. And the pitch is that you could do better by aggregating your resources with us rather than putting solar on your own roof or clearing the trees to make it happen in your own yard. And it was funded in essence by federal tax credits and the solar adders, which were essentially incentive payments for the first 10 years of the array's operation to the folks who were the off-takers. And what these did was essentially ensure that a payback period on a personal investment would be something hovering around 10 years. It used to be slightly less than 10 years, then it was slightly more than 10 years. And in the last year that we tried to have a project done, it had gone up to about 15 years, 14 or 15 years, because of changes to the solar adder system at the PUC level. So from our perspective, that was an impossible project to sell, and we tried to sell it in the VEC territory and simply couldn't get enough people interested in that with a 14 or 15 year payback. So that's really our overall model. The idea is that we should be empowering ordinary Vermonters and incentivizing them, in fact, to open up their pocketbooks and make these investments in our energy generation infrastructure. And we should do it in a way that's fair to everybody so that somebody who has a big backyard like I do is exactly in the same position as somebody who lives in a condominium who wants to be able to participate in this revolution. So having said that, I would say that the biggest challenge, aside from the dollars and cents of a particular investment, the biggest challenge in terms of how our model operates is that we really do need a stable regulatory and pricing environment for a period of about 3 years in order to make one of these things happen. And I say that because the Public Utility Commission's review process is iterative. There are often issues that you don't know about in terms of aesthetics or neighbors who make themselves known in the regulatory process who have not participated in our outreach programs to get information ahead of time. You may have a project that you think you understand the cost of, and then the PUC can say, well, in order to address these aesthetic conditions or in order to address this drainage condition that various parties introduced, we want you to put in various kinds of technical fixes like screening or underground drains, all of which change the cost of the project. Now, the PUC doesn't care, right? They are cost. When it comes to the cost of these things and costs that are being borne by ordinary folks, all they're interested in at that point is protecting the environment and protecting aesthetics and living up to their statutory charge. But there's nothing in there that says that they have to encourage people to or save people money when they're doing it. So if you're going out to the public with a prospectus and trying to raise money from them, you need to know what those costs are before you submit your prospectus to the Department of Financial Regulation for review. So we have this very unforgiving process where we're doing outreach to towns and outreach to neighbors and design work on a particular site. We're trying to figure out what the natural resources and aesthetics challenges are with that site. We're putting together a petition to the PUC which addresses all of those issues and which supported by expert testimony and so on. And then at the end of the regulatory process, we know whether we have extra conditions that we didn't anticipate, or sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. That process, soup to nuts, to when you can actually put shovels in the ground, is about 3 years. And there's really not very much we can do to shorten that time period, because the natural resources investigations can only take place when there's no snow on the ground. Construction can only take place when you can dig in the ground. So there's a kind of cyclical nature that follows a calendar year. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that there were two things that caught my eye about S57 in its current form. And in the spirit of trying to make this a more effective bill, I offer the following two comments. The first is that the definition of community solar probably needs a little bit of tinkering in order to get the result that you're looking for. And the reason that I say this is that what makes community solar in our minds is that the off-takers of the energy, right, the people who are getting credits on their utility bills are actually the owners of the project. In metering 1.0, you often had companies coming in with outside money, outside the state, which is all a good thing. But the owners of that entity were out-of-state entities. So from our perspective, that's not really true community solar, even if um, an outfit like SunCommon can sell participation in that group effort to Vermonters for their own electrical bill benefits. So you should give some thought to what you mean by members or an entity controlled by members in subsection 2 of the new language. You could easily wind up with this language having out-of-state control of these community solar projects. And I'm not saying that there's necessarily one right answer here, but it did occur to me when I read that maybe everybody thought that community solar is by definition local, or at least local to ownership is local to a particular utility service territory. But that's something that you might want to give some thought to. The second sort of wordsmithing comment that I'd have, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, is that subsection 3, which establishes a price cap, apparently it looks like it has a 1-year look back. So there are two comments to this. One is that when I read it, the language reads, the commission shall establish a price cap on projects equal to the price of the highest cost similarly sized solar project from the standard offer program from the preceding 12 months. Now, reading that, I didn't know whether a price cap on projects meant a price cap on the cost to construct it, which really wouldn't make any sense, or what I think you mean is a price cap on the cost of energy from those projects, right? I think what you're getting at is the amount of money that the array is going to generate, and addressing fears by some in government that this is just too expensive a resource for us to dabble in. And I know that that's been the utility, and not to speak for them, but the Department of Public Services concern for many years is that with our adder system that we used to have, the cost of energy was just too high. I dispute that conclusion, but there's no question that this kind of language is aimed at cost control, which must be, I conclude, to address the concerns of those who have cost or price worries about the cost of power to the utilities from net meter projects. What I think would be more helpful from a developer's perspective would be to have a longer time frame, so that this once again goes to the question of certainty of costs. So not a 12-month period look back, right? Because that 12-month look back, you're not going to know whether you can afford it till you can get to the end of the Public Utility Commission process. And by that point, your 12-month look back will have changed several times since you started the development process. I would suggest considering language like a 5-year blended average, so that the effects of 1 year or more year of utility purchase costs won't really move the needle very much, right? So that from a planning perspective, if you're trying to go out and raise money, you can look at a 5-year blended average and say within a couple of cents one way or the other, we have an idea of what this is going to cost. And I think that might actually be better from a regulatory perspective also, because you're going to avoid dramatic price swings that way and have gradual changes as the 5-year blended average changes.
Great. That's very helpful. Thank you. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt if you're not done. I don't think we have any questions yet, but yes, go ahead. Yes.
Are you finished, Ben, or did you have more?
No, that's really the substance. I do this stuff for fun. I mean, I should say that the Acorn Renewable Energy co-op. We're all staffed by volunteers, so we don't make any money off of this. Um, the company we run charges a small administrative fee to administer these projects, which is to say to get the taxes paid and to get the insurance paid and so on and so forth. But the administrative fee really pays for our one part-time coordinator who handles all of that. So this isn't a business for me. These are all sort of passion projects in the sense that I very much believe that the more democratic the ownership of this infrastructure, the better off we all are, both from a resiliency perspective and in terms of um, getting the arrays built where the power is needed, right? I mean, there are huge benefits to having a distributed energy generation grid. Um, there are, I guess, longstanding objections that the utilities have had to not owning this. And I'll just say that when a utility owns a solar array, it becomes part of their rate base, and they're allowed to get their regulated rate of return on it. So it's understandable that utilities would look at the amount of solar or the amount of wind yet to be built and think of that as uh, potentially one way to grow the denominator of their revenue equation. But I think that there are interests of ordinary Vermonters here which need to stack up against the interests of the utilities. And I think ultimately, if we had the state dotted by solar arrays of various sizes that were built with essentially private money, that the state would be better off from a resiliency and a distributed generation perspective. But with that, and understanding that I do talk about this stuff for fun, I don't want to take up all of your time getting too far down those rabbit holes. So if you have any questions for me, either about our model or about how to craft um, uh, a bill that will encourage this sort of behavior, I'm happy to make myself available for any questions you might have.
Super. Well, thank you so much. Any other questions in the room? Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, for those two sessions you talked about, if you have draft language you could submit to us, it could be helpful.
That would be welcome. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Go
had a
ahead.
question. That was one of what I was gonna suggest too, Ben, especially for the definition of community solar, if you could make some suggestions and send them along, that would be helpful. I just wanna say thank you, Ben, for all the work you've done for free, basically for the Acorn Energy Co-op. And for those of you who aren't familiar with their work, they've just done incredible work in Addison County and beyond. And I've gone to a couple of the events and people just feel so, it's community building in addition to solar building, and it's really amazing. I went to an event during COVID when everybody was, home scared by themselves, and they did a really amazing Zoom event. Introducing it was the Bristol project on the landfill in Bristol, and it was just so amazing and warm and literally sunny. But my question to you, Ben, is on the bill, on page 7, in the section, S1.
Yeah.
This limits it to 2 megawatts, per year for each standard offer. Is my understanding, and standard offers are still a little wonky, but for me, what is the largest of your arrays? How many megawatts is it?
So the Bristol array is our largest, and it's 500 kilowatts. And I should say that when we're talking about 500 kilowatts, that's the generation capacity of the array at full strength. And you can think of it a little bit like, you have a 100-watt bulb and a 250-watt bulb, and the 250-watt bulb is going to produce more light. In our case, the larger the array, the more energy it produces, because you're operating at your peak efficiency, which would be 500 kilowatts, which is, remember, that's an order of magnitude down from megawatts. Um, and the sun's going to shine on that, producing energy over time. So energy is kilowatt hours is what the utility sells, right? That's energy over time, and kilowatts is the capacity of the project, which is just a measure of its maximum generating size. So under the statutes that we were operating when we built Bristol, a 500 kilowatt project was the largest that was allowed. And just for a sense of scale, that's about a 3-acre project. The Bristol landfill was a brownfield site that was not being used for anything. It had been closed and capped. And so from the town's perspective, it was sort of dead space. And also because nobody builds their house with a view of the landfill when it's open, there were no abutters who minded that we were putting in a solar array because the place had already been aesthetically challenged by its role for many, many years as Bristol's landfill. So it was a win for the town in the sense that they could use and get some rent from land that wasn't otherwise being used. It was a win environmentally because we have 500 kilowatts of new generation. Definitely, we made the panels available or shares available first to Bristol residents so that the town of Bristol could feel like they were getting a specific benefit for having this infrastructure in town. We opened up the offering to Bristol residents first for a period of time, although they certainly were able to participate up until the close of our deal. And I think Ruth's right. The overall sense of things was really that everybody had come together to do something excellent.
That absolutely. So my question was whether the 2 megawatts was sufficient, but it sounds like it would be. If your biggest project was 500 kilowatts, that would be 4 of those projects would fit into the 2 megawatts. So thank you, Ben.
And one follow-up question to that, and then I think we probably need to move on. My understanding is that, and I'm not proposing that we change this in this language, just to be clear, but like it's this little like pet peeve of mine has been the 1 megawatt cap on, I believe it's net metered projects for any one off taker. And I assume that is not applied to your projects.
No, it doesn't. That's so
Okay.
so under the net metering statute, there was a 500 kilowatt maximum, which is about 3 acres. Our other project was was about a third of the size, located in Shoreham on private land, and that was a 1 acre project. Right. So those the kind of limits that you're talking about for private homes wouldn't exist for these larger projects.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Mr. Marks? Okay. Thank you for joining us. That was very helpful. And if you do have suggested language, we'd love to see it.
Okay, I will send something along. It'll probably be early next week before I can confer with my folks and get you something on that. Let me just say how pleased I am that you all are working so seriously on this. There was a fear, I think, perhaps unarticulated at the time, that our 1-year study was really just a death knell. And it's clear to me that you guys care about this issue and are trying to figure out how all the moving pieces fit together to make something that works for all of us, which is just very heartwarming to see something constructive going on this subject. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, we're gonna shift gears now to Jeff Wilcox and weatherization program. Welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, and I feel like this may be your first. I'm gonna say we've met.
BLI a couple weeks ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, I was gonna say I feel like I remember was in this room. Maybe we should do a round of introductions and then we'll jump in and just mentally like this is we want to learn about. I've been switching gears in that it's not necessarily related to S57 as we were just talking about. I just want to learn about state's doing in terms of weatherization. So thank you. But we'll do a quick round of introductions. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy from House.
Terry Williams from Rutland District.
Ann Watson from the Washington District.
So, on North from the Bennington Center District.
Let's let that,
Nice to meet you. I'm Jeff Wilcox, I work for the state of Vermont, Office of Economic Opportunity. We're part of the Department of Children and Families, under the Agency of Human Services. We administer the state's low income weatherization grant. Sorry, I messed up. I didn't bring my laptop, so I couldn't move the slide, but I don't have a lot of slides in it.
We've got the printout.
June printed them out for me. So I work at the OEM weatherization director. The agenda was basically, I just gonna give you a brief overview, not sure how familiar with you are with the program. And some high level updates, and definitely answer any questions you have. So that picture is of us this last summer. Once a year, we do a weatherization day. Everyone in the program, including our state office, we kind of oversee it, gets together, does some training, celebrate the work of the previous year. So there's 100, not all in this picture, we couldn't all fit, but right now there's about 150 of us statewide, each county, in the state.
This includes the like not local nonprofit.
Yeah,
Your
so,
partners.
there's 6 agencies that have a weatherization program. Each have 2 to 3 counties. 4 of them are community action agencies: Brock Community Action, Bennington, Rutland, Seneca, Southeast Vermont Community Action in Westminster. CVOEO, the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity up in your area. NEO is the one that is in the community action program. They're a nonprofit to weatherization, not just. El Capstone, community action here in central Vermont. So the mission of the program, I always like to state our mission because I don't think everyone really knows what it is. It's to reduce the energy costs for low income families, particularly the elderly, people with disabilities, families with children. Our mission is to improve their energy efficiency, in a result, reducing their energy bills, their heating bills, and their electric bills. And while we do that, we have to ensure the health and safety of the building is brought up to, a lot of times brought up to a certain standard, including indoor air quality. And at the same time, we reduce a lot of carbon emissions. So, some key points. The program is free for income eligible clients. So if your gross income for the last 12 months for your household is less than 80% of the area median income, or 200% of federal poverty limit, you're income eligible and the service is totally free. We provide about $11,500 worth of energy efficiency work in each home we weatherize. Here, kind of jumped ahead. We employ about 150 to 60 workers across the 6 agencies. And a key point is actually this 130 is wrong. I just updated this. We employ about 190 subcontractors across the state. Those are heating contractors, heat pump installer contractors, electricians, plumbers, roofers, and abatement contractors, asbestos abatement, vermiculite. Excuse me. And there's 6 of us at the state office up in Waterbury. That includes myself. This year we have $26 million granted out to the 6 local providers for weatherization. 5 years ago, we had about half of that granted out. So we've ramped up, expanded our program significantly in the last couple of years. The program has been.
Sorry, there's a question.
Oh, yeah.
What's, how did you double the money? It's increased for you.
So it's coming up, but we created a minimum wage for our crew workers, that really improved the recruitment, the retention of the folks who did the work out in the field. So we were limited by the number of workers previously. In tandem, we've been receiving more funds. Definitely got a lot to add,
Okay.
if you don't mind, or
No,
get
go
into
ahead.
that.
Go ahead.
The program has been in existence since the late 70s when it was created by the Department of Energy, Jimmy Carter. And the program in all 50 states and 6 or 7 territories. In that program, the funds, federal funds all go to the state office, our office, and then to the local providers. What do we do at OEO, Office of Economic Opportunity? We oversee, administer the statewide program, which includes a lot of things. We write the grants to the agencies, provide the funds, we get the federal funds, pass it through to them. We have state funds, the home weatherization assistance programs. We provide technical support and training to the network, and we do the quality control and quality assurance. Who's eligible? The household has to be low income to those income guidelines I mentioned. They can be an owner or a renter. So you can rent and still get weatherization. If that's the case, the landlord, that's not a good term, the property owner is, we don't like to use landlord. I always catch myself too late, but the property owner has to do a few things that they have to do by law anyway to rent a property. Make sure the heating system is safe, has been cleaned recently. So that's the income guidelines again. Currently this year, the majority, 52% of our funds are from the federal government, Department of Energy. A subset of their bills is the bipartisan infrastructure law funds. You're auto qualified for the program if you receive fuel assistance, seasonal fuel assistance, or supplemental security income. And there's a few others, but those are the two big ones. So sorry to cut you off. How's it going? We've increased the workforce spending in production in the last 2 years significantly. And how we did that was part of it was different workforce strategies, because the agencies employ a lot of different positions like office, energy auditor, program manager. But the folks that did the work out in the homes, the insulation and the air sealing, those positions were the only ones that were vacant, and they couldn't fill them to the amount needed to spend their full budget. So we created a minimum wage, our office, and required it through the grants that we mimicked the Vermont Department of Labor installation worker B. And it requires it was $20.98 an hour 2 years ago, with a 42.5% fringe rate, which is that's a really good fringe rate. So it's total compensation for $28. And it goes up it follows that rate wage every year. So this year it's $22.98. So a starting crew worker has to make at least $22.98 and get that good fringe rate. So it's helped us a lot. And we've been able to hire 35% more crew for people than we had 2 years ago. So last year was the first year we ever spent over $20 million in the program. We weatherized 1,211 homes, which is 7,178 homes more than the prior 2 years ago, before the minimum wage went into effect. So this year we're.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah, sure. Ask your questions anytime.
Yes, thank you. So you've been able to ramp up the workforce, and so with that increased workforce, you were able to weatherize about 1,200 homes. And so with that same, I assume, are you kind of at like a steady state? Do you think you're at a steady state for workforce at this point?
We are, I would say we're at a good state right now.
Okay.
The position still does have some ups and downs, nowhere near what it used to be, but it's a really hard job, so we gotta find the right.
Fair enough, I hear you there, and then, so do you anticipate, this, I'm kind of getting a little ahead of myself. I mean, I see that you have that you're projected to serve 1,300 homes, in this current fiscal year, and spend even more, like slightly more money, right, like 21 million, which is great. Forgive me if this is.
No, that's all right.
Getting too far ahead. Maybe I should save this question.
Okay.
Because I think you may cover it. I'm gonna hold back for a second.
Sure.
Let you keep going.
Yep. So, and also workforce strategies, we've tried to think outside of the box. We're trying to, our office has never had to do marketing for the network for workers or to apply for services. So we've been doing some stuff through DCF, The agencies have been trying new things. We've been going out to high schools, not as much as we need to, but kind of doing a little presentation on weatherization. We need to get the word out that it's a really good career, and it's a really rewarding career. So, we're still working on it, still a lot to do, but we're making strides. So yes, we're gonna do more this year than last year. Still, there's some underspend, but I think we might have been alluding to. And definitely can talk more about that. The other thing that we have that's really gonna be really good for our program is we've granted a grant to Everblue, which is a national weatherization training program or center, organization's a better term. And they're gonna be our training center operator here in Vermont, Central Vermont. They're looking for a property, but we've already been starting on working up the training curriculum. So they're gonna train our program, and it's gonna be open for all the other energy efficiency type work being done in the state. So Efficiency Vermont, solar, it needs to be sustainable. After our grant with them, which is like a little over a year, ends, we'll fund them fully for our training, but then other organizations will have a partnership in place to send solar training there, or heat pumps, or whatever is needed. So that's a good thing. So with ARPA funds, which you're all familiar with, I'm sure we've had for 2-3 years or so, and they will expire June 30th, 26th. It's been a really great source of funding for us to do more weatherization, but also to use for home repairs and vermiculite abatement, because a high percentage of our homes that apply for weatherization have obstacles to weatherization. They have vermiculite in the attic, which can have asbestos, so we can't touch that. They have a leaky roof, they have rotted sills or flooded basement. Prior to those funds, we had to defer those folks, and they need the weatherization more than anybody. So we've been doing a lot of home repairs. 36% of the clients that received weatherization last year also got home repairs. Averaging $2,400 per home to fix that roof or what have you. 5% of the homes have received vermiculite remediation, so that we then could insulate and air seal that attic. The need is higher. 1 in 10 homes that applies for our service has vermiculite. So we've got a list, 220 homes that are sitting in a list that have vermiculite that we just don't have the funds to treat that vermiculite, so they're not getting weatherized. We've also installed a lot of cold climate heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and EPA certified wood and pellet stoves during the course of weatherization. So we're trying to be as holistic and comprehensive as possible at one time, where it's most efficient to do it all at once. Some trends, now take questions. Majority of our funds now are federal, over 50%. So those federal funds, we have to, we're calling it braid our state weatherization funds with those funds in order to get the budget per unit up to just about 16,000. The federal DOE only allows $8,000 per unit to be spent on average, and in Vermont, with our housing stock, cold climate, we need to do a lot, almost twice as much of that to properly weatherize a house.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry. Yeah.
That's the DOE funding, that's like a 4-year period, bipartisan infrastructure law funds, kind of one-time funds for an extended period of time.
Thank you.
Kind of like ARA was back 10 years ago. So workforce trends, I've already mentioned this, recruitment and retention has improved at the crew position, but we still have work to do. But finding subcontractors for our program is a challenge, but we're meeting the challenge, and it hasn't been a pinch point to help us up, but it's a stress point for the agency. Challenges with the housing stock, as I've already said. We're in a state with one of the oldest housing stocks in the country. Low income folks are typically in the oldest of the oldest, even deferred maintenance is common. was low, and I'd probably say middle, about 200 income folks these days. So, we're seeing a lot of heating system replacements needed when we weatherize the home, just because of not able to clean and tune them every year and age of the heating systems. So that was my overview.
Great, thank you. So my question that I wanted to get at, from earlier was about the funding. So you have a lot of federal money right now.
Yep.
And that is still, it's
So
still happening.
still happening.
Okay, and you're anticipating weathering about, weatherizing about 1,300 homes a year, maybe.
We're gonna likely level fund to the budget that they
Yeah.
had last year.
Yeah.
And I think we'll weatherize more than 1,300 the next year.
Okay.
But not a huge amount more.
So it's gonna be around
Around
that
there, yeah.
number, okay? And so, the federal funding that you have, my understanding is that it's quite a bit. It's kind of it's a big chunk of money, and I'm gonna suppose something, and I just wanna know if this is true.
Okay.
The money that you have right now, is that gonna, you're not gonna be able to spend that all down this year, is that?
Yeah, so it's kind of different case by different funding sources. So for the Department of Energy core funding we've gotten since 1980. That's 1.7 million. We'll spend all that down, and we've raised some state funds with it. The bill fund, we have another 3 or 4 years to spend. But this is our first year of spending. We plan to, they have a grant, we'll spend as much as we can this year. In the next 2 years, we'll probably speed that up. And then ARPA funds, we do have grants out there to weatherize homes, as well as those additional things that I mentioned. Those funds will be spent within the next year, certainly by June 30th of 26. That's the deadline, and we're gonna make sure we spend them well ahead of the deadline, so we don't send anything back.
Right.
So that's the funds that we have, so we're gonna use those in the next couple of years.
Sure, so which one was the one that's gonna last you the next 2 or 3 years? Oh, the bipartisan. And the IRA money?
The IRA funds, we aren't using them yet. We're still working with Department of Public Service Department on that, and we plan to spend those in the next state fiscal year, start spending them.
So you start spending them next year?
Yep, and that's $29 million. That's gonna be really.
Well, that's a lot.
You have that in the bank, you should spend.
They have it
that
in the bank.
as possible.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's the one that's.
Did they have it in the bank? Yeah, that's them, but yeah, we're moving forward full steam to get everything in line. That needs some approval from DOE, IRA folks on our modeling tool and all that, but we plan to get that in place.
Sorry, just thinking ahead to future things.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, go ahead.
So just, I wanna understand, the workers that you increased the wage for, that is awesome. And those are your employees,
No.
they're not contractors, how does that work?
They work for the individual agencies, which 4 of which are community action agencies, the others NEDO.
Right,
And all their funding comes from us.
Okay.
For weatherization.
so they're not
So
state
they're not
employees,
direct
they're,
employees of ours.
but you're requiring those agencies to pay them at a certain
Yep.
level and benefit package.
Correct.
And then they are able to afford to do it because of the money.
Because we gave them the
Because you
funds
give
to
them the
do it.
funds to
Yep.
do it. Okay, that makes more sense, so sorry.
So my question, sorry.
So-
Sorry, no, sorry,
No.
it's sorry. if
I'm
you-
just trying to
yeah.
understand the funding.
Yeah, they're not direct
Then-
employees, but all their funds come from us to keep the building open, to do all the work, pay the employees,
Got it.
buy the equipment.
Oh, so
Yeah.
that was gonna say, the
Yeah.
equipment and supplies
Yeah.
also comes from the
Comes from
local
the grants that we
community
get for that.
action groups.
Yep,
So you're just the umbrella organization that funds the work that is being done at the local.
funds and
Like, or region.
overseas.
Yes, create, yeah, of course, yeah, I didn't mean to make it sound.
No, I'm just saying, it's all over.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Go ahead.
So Brock, Bennington Rural Hospital Council
Yep,
as an independent agent under, I think it's funding.
yes, definitely, they're one of our, weatherization assistance programs is another term.
Yes, okay.
Yep. Know those folks well.
Another couple of questions for you,
Yep.
so, still thinking, thinking about the funding still. What's your long-term, like, continued stable funding need? What's the funding need? What's the gap? Is there a gap that you're looking to fill?
I would say the most critical gap for the people we serve who are in the most dire condition are those home repair and vermiculite funds.
Mhm.
Within a year, they're gonna be gone and those folks aren't gonna get weatherized unless we come up with another funding source.
Mhm.
After that, you know, I think the program at 20 to 24 million a year. We've got multiple years ahead of us if all things go well with the federal funds that, you know, everybody's worried about.
Yes.
It's the more critical gap is those people with home repairs, vermiculite needs.
Okay, so that's sort of like adjacent, it's like the prep.
It's the prep work.
Yeah.
We'll still be able to weatherize the same amount of homes if we can't help them, but that's not a good thing for those people in really
Yeah.
rough shape who need it the most.
Any other, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a bill, Senate Bill 65 would take some of the funds raised by the electric surcharge, energy efficiency Vermont, and then send that to the thermal sector. Is that the bill that you're looking at or anything, or you know thoughts on it?
So I work. We come and testify, provide facts. I've read it and had some feedback. I don't know if you asked me if they came to us, could we use them? That could be something I could answer. But you know, I don't personally lobby for different bills. I come out and give the facts and I can advocate for the need that we have for home repairs and vermiculite, but that's as far as I dare go on that.
Okay,
Unless you have a specific question.
That's good. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
But I'm just trying to think of, if that's the need. That is not, that's, as the chair said, sort of energy efficiency. Adjacent. And so it seems like we need to find a funding source that is. Specific to that need.
Yeah, I know, you know, the folks that hope the Efficiency Vermont serves, their housing stock is newer, but still they see a lot of vermiculite homework, especially for moderate folks. So, now I'm probably advocating, and I shouldn't, but home repairs is important for a lot of Vermonters, especially low income Vermonters.
Yeah,
Actually, we spent $1 million last year, it's not included in those numbers I gave you, for home repairs to get those clients able to then be weatherized. And we spent $400,000 on abatement for vermiculite to get those homes weatherized, to give you a general idea of what the need is for those home repairs and vermiculite. Without it, you can't weatherize a home properly because the measures will be ruined or make things worse for the clients.
Yeah.
When it gets wet, moldy, etc.
yeah.
Well, to that point, and then I would like to be able to wrap up here soon so that we can have a little bit of a break before our next witness. But can you describe how, like, do you partner with Efficiency Vermont or BED? What does that look like?
We meet monthly with Efficiency Vermont, the Public Service Department, to make sure we're in coordination and we're all working to the same goal. When our agencies are out in the home doing the work, Efficiency Vermont has a contract with them to pay for the electrical efficiency stuff. The efficiency coaches do it, like changing out old refrigerators, freezers, installing electrical appliances, cut their electric bill. So we do communicate with them and work with them. Yeah.
Great, okay. Awesome, any other questions? Okay, so what I'd like to do here, team, is thank you,
Sure.
really
Thank you.
appreciate. This is very helpful. Yeah, this is an area that I am very interested in. Figure out how do we meet the need? I'd like to take a little bit of a break before our next witness, who is scheduled for 10:30. And so what I'm anticipating is if we can start at like 10:35, push Chair McNamara back by like 5 minutes and give us 7 minutes of break time. I realize it's not very much, but it's something. So we'll take a
Sound is on.
That's important, it's not long.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, we have a quorum, so we're gonna come back from our break. Good morning, hello. So we are back to S57 on standard offer, and we are joined by the chair of the PUC, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Be
so
here.
tell us your thoughts.
Do I have a room for names going through December? It's not.
Yeah, no, you can't use sorry, I
Oh,
didn't know that you had this presentation.
see, it's the one I sent yesterday.
I'm sorry, folks.
I'll just start off. So, for the record, Ed McNamara, Chair of the Public Utility Commission, talking about S57. Do you have, I'll start going and just,
I'll put it up in a minute,
great, thanks.
I'll give you the,
So it'll be on our website and on.
in a minute. And he wants to project, so he.
Oh,
I
okay.
can start talking, but it's easier to do.
Sure.
You just look at the slides. My slides tend to be incredibly boring, so, I'm good with that.
Still good.
So the first slide basically just shows Vermont solar in a regional context, and essentially Vermont has, well, one thing to note, it's really important to look at percentage of the peak load. If you look at absolute numbers, Vermont's always going to have less numbers than a state with 12 times as many people. Like it's just so. First chart, when you get a chance to look at the slides at some point, we have about 48% of our peak load is met through distributed solar. That is far and away better, larger than the regional average, which is about 24%. And the next closest state is Massachusetts. That's maybe 26, 27, 28%, say 27%. Considerably more than New Hampshire, which is less than 10%. So when you hear, I have heard arguments of Vermont's falling behind, and I'm very curious about what metrics exactly they're using when they say that. So, because the metrics I'm aware of, that's not the case. Also keeping in mind, greenhouse gas emissions generally, this is something that by statute, we're looking at, and electric sector is less than 3% of Vermont's GHG emissions. Transportation, heating, agriculture, and industrial processes are all higher than that. Another point on GHG emissions, with 100% renewable energy standard, the standard offer program is no longer a climate mitigation program. Res Tier 2 requires 20% of electricity come from in-state renewables. Standard offer is about how renewable generators get paid, not whether they get billed. So quick overview of standard offer program. Started in 2009. And it's a 2.2 megawatt cap on individual project size. It is a completely arbitrary number. There happened to be at one point in 2009, somebody I think in Waitsfield that was making 2.2 megawatts wind turbines, and that's how we arrived at that number. So if standard offer continues, which I recommend it not, the PUC recommends that it does not continue, suggests revisiting 2.2 megawatts, potentially 5 megawatts, and make it consistent with renewable energy standard. So under the program, the PUC is the one who's actually conducting the procurement. We basically do an RFP. We set a price cap for each technology. As you'll see later, it's primarily solar. And then we use a reverse auction mechanism or an RFP. We select projects based on the lowest price until a certain megawatt capacity is filled. And a portion of the procurement is set aside for non-solar resources. There was recognition very early on. Solar is the easiest site. Small wind turbines are more difficult. There's only so many landfills that have capacity, so many farms that can do ag methane. So been predominantly solar that we've been seeing. So the energy and the renewable energy credits are transferred to the utilities along with the costs. There's 3 utilities not subject to the standard offer program, Burlington Electric, Washington Electric, and Swanson Electric. The rationale was that at the time the program went into place, these were all, I believe they were all 100% renewable, or maybe it was 2012 when the program was sort of reinvented. They were 100% renewable. So one thing I would suggest is, given that the RES requires all utilities to be 100% renewable, that you revisit why any utility should be exempt from the standard offer program on a going forward basis. I wouldn't retroactively apply the costs, but on a going forward basis. So I mentioned 2009, that's when the legislation went through. There was initially a 50 megawatt program cap. And the PUC was tasked with administratively setting the price. So we had to basically figure out what the cost was. Did not go well. We don't contract typically, we don't build projects, so the prices were not great. 2012, program cap was expanded to 127.5 megawatts. I don't remember why that arbitrary number. But it required the use of market-based mechanisms to set prices, and that's when we transferred to those reverse offer mechanisms. And then another important component as well, in 2015, renewable energy standard was passed. 2017 is when it went into effect. Already mentioned that sort of obviates the need for standard offer. Also want to say, so I was at the Public Service Department under the Shumlin administration during this time, and there was active discussion about whether to try to repeal standard offer. And the reason to not do it was because there was a lot of confusion about what are RECs, should they do RECs, what is standard offer? And the idea was just let this program, lack of a better term, die a natural death as it's sort of fully subscribed and then just goes away. So that was the thinking at the time. Types of resources that we procured under standard offer. Majority of solar, I'd say it's close to 90% solar. And then after that, there's a couple hydro projects that have come in, some farm methane projects, and a few small wind projects as well. With respect to the prices, I'm going to focus mostly on solar here. As I mentioned earlier, when we were setting prices, prices were actually, they were legislatively set at 30 cents a kilowatt hour in 2009. And then we were told you have 6 months, figure out if you can come up with a lower price. We weren't able to. So there's a tranche of projects that are getting 30 cents per kilowatt hour. Once we're able to move to a competitive process, prices have dropped to, I think the average price in 2022 was 8.19 cents per kilowatt hour. And it's important to note too that, especially under the Obama administration, there's something called the Sunshot Initiative. And that the idea of that was a significant investment in reducing the cost of installing solar. And it actually worked really, really well. Prices across the country plummeted on solar projects. So that is, I haven't heard this recently, but I did hear at one point somebody say, well, standard offer pushed the price of programs of solar down. But no, actually it didn't. The RFP process in the standard offer provided a very clear demonstration that the prices have dropped. It's the competitive process that's most important here. I mentioned before technology diversity, small wind, just to give you an example of other prices, non-solar. Small wind is anything less than 100 kilowatts. And there's been maybe a dozen projects, I think, under contract, a few of them built. They get paid 25 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's a fairly significant price differential if you're looking for non-solar. I will also say though that having different technologies provides you different generation profiles, provides you power at different times in solar, and so it's difficult to compare one technology to another just on cost alone. There's other attributes that are important to consider. Talking really fast.
You sent me it yesterday and I didn't switch the day.
Oh, sorry. So next point, and this is where I think standard offer is really starting to show its age, locational issues. In 2009, when standard offer was put in place, there is this assumption that distributed generation would always reduce transmission costs. And that's because up until that point, it was mostly true. When we did look at distributed solar, it actually did a great job reducing the need to build out transmission. 500 megawatts later, that's no longer the case. And we're actually seeing pressure in some areas of the state where solar inappropriately sited distributed generation, mostly solar, could actually increase costs for Vermonters. Belco has prepared a long-range plan. Hopefully they came in, gave an overview. That's what I'm talking about there. Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Inappropriately placed because of,
Grid constraints. In other words, there's
not because of access to the sun, turning about. Where they can be best picked up and distributed.
exactly. There's some areas of the state that you can have too much of a good thing. Solar can be extremely beneficial. And if you have a very large portion of it, you're trying to squeeze it out of a narrow pipe, which means that pipe needs to be expanded. The whole cost allocation issue is a whole other rabbit hole that I suggest we don't go down. And I'm not saying that Vermonters automatically pay, but there are appropriate and inappropriate locations for distributed generation.
And part of the PUC's review process is about location, right? Or not?
Not. Under standard offer, no. Standard offer, it is whatever is cheapest gets selected. That has historically been the case. And that's part of my concern with the program is there is no locational piece in there. Which is why, in my view, it's the utilities that should be doing the procurement. They already have to do this under tier 2. Utilities know their systems much better than the regulators do. We're pretty good, but those guys do it day in and day out. And so, in my view, or the commission's view, it's the utilities that should actually be procuring these resources because they know where to put it to minimize the constraints and to minimize potential costs and maximize the benefits as well.
Thank you. I don't want to interrupt.
Oh,
I think
I
it's
can keep going. Right?
it's a very interesting point and I want
Yeah,
to come back to it and try to figure out some solutions there, but you have more, so I'm gonna let you keep going.
yeah, sorry, I'll try to do this relatively quick.
Oh, you're
I'm running late. There's a couple of comments I heard the other day about sort of the benefits of standard offer. One is that the standard offer program ensures that projects get built. So just to be clear, if the utility doesn't meet renewable energy standard requirements, they have to pay what's called an alternative compliance payment. It's currently 2 or 3 times the cost of a renewable energy credit. And also, typically, utility cannot recover penalties in rates. So Green Mountain Power gets penalized, it's their shareholders. So they have very strong incentives to make sure that the projects are getting built. The other piece too that I heard sort of purported benefit was it provides transparency on prices. So there is an abundance of information available, even without standard offer program. The national labs have historically every year said, here's the cost of solar. You have our own utilities that do procurements. The PUC, I'm sorry, when the utility does a procurement, we don't necessarily look at the contract at that particular moment in time. But when they come in for a rate case, they have to explain what their contracts were and they have to justify them to us. So we do have at some point all the information on every project that got built and how much they had to pay. We also have a lot of authority on when it comes to utilities, and pretty much anytime we can say we want a compilation of all your contracts and the prices. And so it's very easy to get that. Looking at other states as well, there's lots of different ways to find prices. And definitely do not need standard offer on that. Another aspect that I'm concerned about is the standard offer program reduces, it cuts out a layer of regulatory oversight. As I mentioned, we actually do the procurement. But our goal is actually, we're supposed to be reviewing utilities rates, including the reasonableness of power supply contracts. If we're buying a bunch of power for the utilities, nobody's reviewing that power, those power contracts. And so this bill, this is a back of the envelope calculation. It would require the PUC to enter into contracts totaling over $300 million. That's paid out over 25, or Vermonters paid out over 25 years. And those contracts would all happen in a 5-year period, if I'm reading it all correctly. So I don't know of any other area where the state can just go out and do $300 million of procurement without some sort of oversight. And there really isn't anything. I mean, it's a public process, people can comment, but and it is a significant blind spot in my view. And it takes us out of our traditional role of regulating to actually procuring. It's a very odd concept to actually have necessary to work for utilities.
Can I ask you a question
Yeah.
about that? Wondering if there is a way to bake that oversight in.
Yes, I think the best way to get that oversight in is tell the utilities to do
Have it,
transparency.
yeah.
You could also, and this is one of I think, I'm trying to remember, I know I testified at some point that we have these zombie programs. We have a program and then we find ways to keep it going regardless of whether it makes sense. In my view, this is a zombie program and we should be revisiting 15 years later, like look at the fundamentals. And even if there's certain aspects that you want, if you want the technology diversity, for example, if you want something beyond solar, tell the utility, we want X portion of your power supply to be non-solar. You can also say, we want competitive procurements, and therefore you need to do it. It's putting the PUC in the place of the utilities that in my mind is the biggest problem, because we don't have the information necessary to do the job well. And we can replicate all of that, but it's significant cost and administrative burden. And it's, in my view, since there's such a simpler way of doing it, I don't understand why we would do that. There is one other piece I just want to talk about quickly, litigation. So standard offer program, there's been 20 different lawsuits over the program. And not about projects coming out, but the program itself. And the reason why standard offer is not typical procurement program. It's not the only one in the country like this, but it's definitely not typical. So usually legislation tells utilities go out and procure specific resources. When you have state government selecting resources, then you start bumping up against Federal Power Act and some other federal laws. US Supreme Court a couple of years ago described sort of this tension point as cooperative federalism. There is sort of a gray area where the federal government works and the state government works. And I would just say, from my perspective, I'm not convinced about the cooperation that's going to happen on the federal side for the next couple of years when it comes to these kind of resources. So the litigation piece is making me particularly nervous at this point in time. And having the state in this somewhat unusual role accentuates the possibility of the litigation. So 20 legal proceedings, Vermont Supreme Court, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Vermont Federal District Court, Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Also note, I heard somebody say, well, the Attorney General actually represents the state. That's true, and they're good lawyers. And we're the experts, so they can't do the job without us. It's a lot of resources on our time as well, if we're litigating all these cases. Talked about alternatives, and then the last piece on the community solar, I'm just throwing out this. I'd suggest if you're gonna move forward on this, there'd be a lot more clarity as to what this actually means. It's not entirely clear to me. There is a definition of what community solar means, but it's clear kind of this category differs from other standard offer projects with respect to price. How do we go through, we're doing this, how do we do an RFP associated with it? And then also, if the exemptions for Burlington, Washington Electric, and Swanton are kept, should folks in those service territories be able to participate because other people are paying for them to participate? There's a significant inequity there. So I'd say either take community solar out of standard offer. Well, my first recommendation was get rid of the standard offer. Second would be community solar sort of standalone, figure out its own mechanism for it. And then the last piece I want to note is it wasn't entirely clear to me if the intent of this was to replace group net metering. I'd suggest the bill just be really explicit on that. There was the Act 179 report, PSD provided a report on this, and that there'd be testimony about that piece. It wasn't entirely clear to me. Am I testifying on Act 179 report on community solar? So if you do go forward with something like this, I think some clarity would be very helpful about what exactly is that's being proposed.
Just
That
go
point.
ahead, yeah.
So to that point, if. I mean, I can only speak for myself, one of my goals would be to try to find a way to maintain some community solar project, program. So if this is not the way to do it, do you have recommendations about how that could be integrated into the broader regulatory structure?
Yeah, that could be a specific directive to utilities of, we want X amount, X percentage of your load to be met through community solar. Go out and do it. Vermont Electric Co-op in particular has done these kind of projects. So I think they are a potential example. We could probably have Andrea Cohen talk about it, and we should touch on it in years past. I think that is probably the simplest and most straightforward. There's also some federal money. I don't know what the status is at the moment, but there's federal money available for a program called Solar for All. And that would have been the utilities actually implementing the program themselves. And so hearing from PBC, PMP, and others about how that program is structured would probably be helpful. It hasn't gotten to the point where we're involved yet. It's mostly been PSD and the utilities, but I think that might be, I think there's already an existing mechanism that can be potentially utilized for community solar.
Okay, thank you.
And sorry, there would probably need to be specific legislation saying utilities need to do this, but I'm just saying the mechanism itself, I think, exists already.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This is so valuable and it's a lot to chew on. To be like, how do we, what is the path forward? So thank you. And to be continued. As we make changes, I'm gonna want to circle back to see if the changes that we make address concerns or if there's yeah, just what that looks like for you. So thank you so much.
Always available.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, super. And so we're gonna switch to Drew Watson, who's with us virtually. It looks like hello.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chair Watson.
Welcome back. So
Thank you, guys. I apologize. I have a stomach bug and want to spare all of you from being in the room with you, but grateful for the chance to testify today.
yeah, for sure. Hope you feel better.
Thank you. Again, good morning, committee members. Chair Watson, thank you for offering a chance for the Nature Conservancy to speak in support of Senate Bill 57 to reauthorize the standard offer program. Over the last 60 years, the Nature Conservancy has helped protect more than 300,000 acres in the state of Vermont, including 1/4 of all the state lands held by Vermont. We steward 58 natural areas in the policy areas of freshwater, climate, and land. And we have lobbied and participated in Act 59, known as 30 by 30, and Act 121, the Flood Safety Act, among other environmental priorities. It's fair to ask why we're here to support the reauthorization of standard offer, given TNC's role in the state as conservationist. We are here today as part of a larger long-term strategy to support the build-out of renewable energy to address the climate crisis while preserving the most critical natural areas for connectivity, biodiversity protection, carbon storage, and climate resilience. Climate change and the use of fossil fuel emitting energy sources continue to put the spaces we've worked so hard to conserve at risk. So we are here today to support the affordable, fast deployment of new utility scale renewables in Vermont. The standard offer program is a proven and cost-effective strategy to ensure that we steadily deploy new renewable energy. While we have a renewable energy standard that will push us to 100% renewables by 2035, standard offer presents an opportunity for reliable, predictable, low-cost renewables that front-load the state's electrical generation capacity. Standard offer projects meet or exceed the standards set by other solar projects in Vermont in almost every way. All but one standard offer project from 2016 until the program cap in 2022 offered lower prices for electricity than other long-term solar partnership purchase agreements. And almost every standard offer solar project awarded has been or will be built, and those projects move through the permitting process to receive their certificates of public good faster than other projects, averaging 16 months. The Nature Conservancy in Vermont supports specifically raising the size cap on standard offer projects from 2.2 to 5 megawatts, in line with the recently passed update to the renewable energy standard. This 5 megawatt cap, combined with a 2 megawatt allocation for community solar, fits the state's desire to see small and medium-sized projects fit with Vermont's landscape and community character. There's also a small conservation benefit of the 5 megawatt cap worth mentioning. If a developer is stringing together two 2 megawatt projects and a single megawatt project, that's 3 individual shade buffers that need to be cleared, whereas one 5 megawatt project means one shade buffer around the perimeter. 91% of projects in the standard offer program, online or pending, are solar or hydroelectric. By limiting the program to solar, wind, and hydro, the state would continue to push fossil fuel emitting generation out of our electric portfolio and focus on projects that are reliably getting built. The Nature Conservancy in Vermont is here today to support reauthorizing standard offer, and we also ask that one small amendment be made to the program to support the goals of Vermont conservation design. The Nature Conservancy is asking that standard offer projects be sited outside of the high priority or priority blocks in Vermont conservation design, or if they have to be sited in those blocks, that the applicant demonstrate no undue adverse impact to the environment in those blocks. Our intention with this is to limit the potential impact from solar arrays on forest and habitat connectivity, important areas for biodiversity, and to make incremental changes to support the state's ecological landscape. By integrating this into the standard offer program, we are saying that state-supported and administered generation projects should be sited without those major land impacts. We believe Vermont can protect forests in key areas while also rapidly expanding solar. And the new standard offer cap of 20 megawatts per year, or 100 over the next 5, is only 80 to 200 acres of land on average, which we believe is available in places without significant environmental value. Although it's a small step, this is a meaningful pairing of new renewables committed to the functional landscape, and we hope you will work with us on including this language or a version of it, and on wholeheartedly pushing forward reauthorization of standard offer. Consideration for land and new electric generation should complement each other as mutually beneficial environmental goals, and we are here to say yes to supporting new renewables in the state of Vermont. Thank you all for your time today and for inviting me in to testify.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Mr. Watson? Yes,
Do we have this just,
it's on the website.
it is,
Yeah.
and this one, I don't know, nature.
Drew Watson, yeah, Drew Watson. Okay.
It's yesterday.
Is that?
It came in yesterday.
Yesterday. And it's context. Yes. Okay. Super. Any other questions? Okay, right, well, thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of the day.
Yes, you as well. Okay, so we are going to switch gears yet again to if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Yes, then we can jump to your stuff. So giving you more time than anticipated. So yeah, it's a big conversation.
Yeah.
To housing, and I'm wondering if this is your first time in committee with us this year, yeah?
This year it is.
Okay, so we'll do a round of introductions and then we'll go from there. Come in.
Good morning, Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District. Good morning.
Gary Williams, Rutland District.
Senator Ann Watson from the Washington District.
Yes, well, those will be back to scientists. Scott back Calvin.
See everybody. I know Jude.
Okay.
For the record, I'm Alex Farrell, I'm the Commissioner at the Department of Housing and Community Development. Madam Chair, you want to go lunch right in?
That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna attempt to share my screen. So I believe you all have materials that I passed along, but I'm gonna tell you right now, yeah, that's right. We are not going to look at all of my slides. I wanted them there for your reference so you can see the summary of the whole package, but I don't expect to get through all that today. So I'm just gonna start here, which is just to talk about the sort of 4 pillars that we were thinking of in our strategy when what turned into the PAC bill. And you probably heard a lot about these themes in other committees and throughout parts of the building. So there are a couple facets that focus on infrastructure, both funding and financing of infrastructure. Thinking about investments, so appropriations and alterations to programs to strengthen them and make them more effective. A couple initiatives to try to broaden the base of who is participating in small scale development here in Vermont, as we know that that's one of our bottlenecks here in producing homes. And then what we came to talk about here today, which is what we look at as procedural barriers. So this is land use, thing, and appeals reforms. So again, skipping right through all this really great stuff, but not here today. I'm going to start with appeals reforms. So you'll note that I highlighted on these slides where in our administration draft bill you can find the language for these items. So in your chamber, Senator here has submitted the bill to the Ledge Council back in January. We're currently waiting for an actual bill number. In lieu of an actual bill, I have provided you all with the bill that we drafted internally so that we can at least see language. All right, so starting with appeals reforms. So in prior sessions, we and partners have proposed sort of a blunter version of this first one. And that blunter version of this appeals reform was again location based. And so looking at our designated areas and trying to reduce the number of appeals in those areas. And the previous attempts are focused on, all right, if you're in a designated area and it's zoned residential, basically you can't appeal the project as long as the municipality awarded a permit. We've come back with a far more nuanced approach this year. And so the proposal is to basically defer to the land use, the comprehensive plan and state land use planning for that area. And so if the project is in line, then it's going to be really hard to appeal. In order to appeal a housing project, you need to demonstrate a clear and substantial departure from the comprehensive plan. So this would be the municipal plan, or the land use regulation could capture the regional plan soon to be approved by the LRC. So achieves roughly the same thing, but still leaving an avenue to appeal in the case that it does depart from the land use plans. The second is sort of a perennial conversation here, at least for the last few years, around the petition appeal, which used to be called the 10-person appeal. You all did make a change to make this now a 20-person appeal. Do folks know what I'm talking about? Should I? Okay. Our proposal, somewhat in line with what we proposed last year, is to change this rather than a number of individuals, a specified number, scale it to the size of the
the population of the municipality, in this case proposing 20% would have to sign on in order for the petition field to apply. And again, a lot of jurisdictions just don't have this avenue for appeal, where if you don't have standing otherwise, you can obtain standing by basically signing on to effectively a petition. And so I've talked to my colleagues in other jurisdictions, and I've heard anything from 5% to 30% of the population that they require to sign on to appeal. So 20% felt appropriate. So this next one is sometimes called the skin in the game provision. This language was borrowed from the state of Massachusetts, so we actually went far more moderate than Massachusetts goes on this. And so this is giving the court, if the appeal goes to the Superior Court, this gives the court discretion up to $50,000 for the appellant to be held liable for the developer's legal fees. So again, $50,000 cap, and this is just legal fees and other fees associated with defending the appeal. This could not be other costs that we know are incurred by developers, such as in the Putney project, I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about, where as a result of the delays, their costs skyrocketed by millions of dollars. There's a cash flow delay that makes it really hard on investors and developers. And so frankly, this is a very, I think, reasonable and moderate step in this direction. Massachusetts, for example, does enable further compensation beyond just legal fees. And so there's also a provision in our proposal. The court can waive this in the event of hardship. So if somebody, an appellant, doesn't have the means to do this, the court can choose to waive this. And again, this is all at the court's discretion. All right, and then this last provision in appeals reforms is really just following along with a couple of items that we've already put in statute here. We already set a target for the environmental court to make a decision following, I believe it's 60 days following the conclusion of a case. So now we are adding two more provisions that somewhat go in line with that, asking the court to prioritize appeals cases that have to do with residential housing, residential cases. As well as setting a goal that they hear the cases within 60 days. Again, both of these still defer to the court. This is just setting in statute a target for them, setting a goal.
Can you just speak to the division of powers that it makes me worry about that?
Absolutely. So the provisions like this are already on the books, and the reason this does not violate sort of this for the division of powers, as you mentioned, is because we're really just setting goals and we're still deferring to them. So it's still ultimately up to, say, if you had Judge Zone in here, it would still ultimately be up to him. But we're just asking them politely to have these goals. Okay.
Fair.
I'm gonna see it. We like partnerships. All right, I'm gonna jump ahead before we talk Act 181. Because there's a lot there. I'm gonna move ahead to some of these other items regarding permitting, environmental permitting. If I get it over my head, I might look to my friend Billy Coster to correct any facts, but he's not an expert in this bill, so I don't want to put him in an uncomfortable position. But so there's a provision here regarding wetlands permitting. Again, trying to follow along the tiered structure that's been placed under Act 181. But adjusting some of the wetlands permitting, particularly in inter exemption areas, designated areas, tier 1A and 1B areas, and existing industrial parks. So this would amend the buffer zone in those areas, so it would reduce it from a 50-foot buffer in wetlands down to 25. It makes adjustments to the net gain of wetlands requirements. And the way I understand this is effectively so that if there isn't a net gain in those areas, that can be compensated for outside of those areas. So this is sort of enabling us to make these adjustments here, but still meet those goals on a statewide basis. All right, so that's the wetland permitting, and to clarify, that's class 2 wetlands within these areas. This is paired with a wastewater connections proposal. This was the result of a study group that pulled together a number of stakeholders to try to reduce hurdles to wastewater connections permitting. And the way this would function is, certain municipalities could effectively seek a general permit from the Agency of Natural Resources. If they obtain that, then review of wastewater connections is fully delegated to the municipality, so it wouldn't be this duplicative process where the municipality signs off on certain aspects of the connections and the Agency of Natural Resources signs off on others. It would all be done at the municipal level.
This is sounding very familiar to me, because that's just, sorry, wasn't on the debate last year. I'll stop, keep going.
No, that's okay, Senator.
I feel like we, or maybe we just have talked about it.
Did they take it away from the municipalities?
This would be delegating it to the municipality. Billy, is there any?
Sure, the record, Billy Coster, Agency of Natural Resources, and for the record, I was here to listen to the last bill, but I stuck around because Alex asked. So my understanding is what you've done in the past is you provided a full delegation to municipalities who wanted to take it. What this does is we still retain the permitting oversight, so we're still a responsible entity, we still track the information and data. But we issue a general permit to the municipality, which is a very simple administrative process, and then they do all the work. So it's, the division of labor is similar, but some of the challenges was the kind of records management and the oversight and enforcement. So we still retain that as the agency for the issuance of the general permit, but the municipalities are then free to actually do the work without our slowing them down.
Okay.
And we can get folks in here to explain that in much better detail than I just showed.
And Brian Redmond would be, I'm sure, a good contact point to discuss that in more detail. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna jump into some proposed changes to Act 181 that are in the bill. You'll hear me as I go through these really highlight urgency in some of these. And why we're proposing these now rather than waiting for the next session. I'm also going to recognize some are broader conversations. The third thing that I'm going to say is that a lot of this was developed in partnership with what was the NRB, which no longer exists. And so if I sound on a couple of these items, for example, governance, if I sound a touch out of my depth, it's because these were administration proposals that the then NRB was able to speak to. I don't know that the LRB has weighed in yet.
It's all good, no worries.
Cool, thanks.
It's a good guy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, so why don't I start with the interim exemption? So there's some cleanup language in here. The most sort of pertinent one that came up most frequently here was regarding subdivisions, and what was challenging for the NRB, and I believe still the LRB in administering the interim exemptions, is it's hard to follow what was believed to be the intent in a case where a project that the number of units is clearly exempted under the interim exemptions, but in order to create those units, they needed to subdivide a parcel, and that subdivision was another trigger for Act 250, which then didn't seem to follow what we believe was the legislative intent. And so there's some cleanup in here to make sure that the LRB feels the intent and the language match each other. And you can see highlighted in yellow here where all this language can be found in the bill. There's also language in here to propose expanding the interim exemption. So this is talking about expanding the areas of the interim exemptions. Oh, you know what? I skipped one. And this is one I really want to touch on. Okay, so extending the interim exemption. So thinking about the sunset, not changing the areas first. I just want to talk about the sunset. Currently, the sunset for most of these is January 1, 2027, so the end of next year. And there's one, the downtown plus half mile for the private housing project sunset is July 1 of 2027. We have already heard from home builders, developers that if there is any uncertainty in sort of a potential gap between the sunsetting and then the permanent 1A and 1B areas coming online, home builders are likely to just wait it out next year, wait and see where in likely 2027 sometime these 1A and 1B areas and land where they end up. The goal with extending the interim exemption, so this again could be completely independent of expanding the areas, but just extending the sunset is to make sure that there isn't such a gap so that home builders don't next calendar year start that slowdown, because we're really fearful that they would just, too much uncertainty, I'm gonna wait, I don't wanna get caught in between, miss the interim, and then perhaps not line up with where the permanent
I
exists.
have a question here.
But wasn't the only requirement to have the application in by that month?
My understanding is it's breaking ground.
Okay. Check.
Yes, go ahead.
But wouldn't the incentive be actually the opposite, that they would speed up, so they would make sure they would get in there before the exemption goes away? It seems like it would speed things up and that, and over the next year and a half, more of the developers would be like, hey, we gotta move fast.
I think that's a really good point, Senator, and that's exactly right, which is what we're seeing right now, we are seeing folks speed up. The tail on planning a development is so long that it literally will start next year, that folks will say, I won't be able to make that, 12-month timeline is too short for me to make sure that I can get in. I'm just gonna take my time and wait until I see what the permanent extension is. Because a lot of these projects truly take years to plan.
No, I understand that. Feels like there's always gonna be a sort of pushing, drop dead point. It's just where that is, and like extending it now would actually slow things down, because people would be like, oh, now we need more time. I mean, as a procrastinator, I kind of know how that works. Sometimes you just sort of need a deadline to be like, gotta get this stuff.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. What I'll say is the object of these was to be a bridge to the permanent exemption. So we are never intending for many of these areas, we're never intending for these exemptions to go away. Now, there are gonna be a lot of areas where the exemptions go away and they're not gonna necessarily be able to obtain a 1B designation. And that's fine. That will always follow the logic that you just laid out. But many of these areas, including where we're sitting right now, there's just gonna be, I guess I'll take the proposed development down the hill here at Country Club. That is a good example, one that could get caught in this in between, where they might just say, we can't possibly meet this timeline, so let's wait. Granted, there's a little bit more certainty that perhaps that parcel could be included in a 1A or 1B area. So this is the best example, but it's really those cases where we're truly trying to make this a bridge and not slow down home building. So.
I'll have to think about it more. It's the first time I'm going through all this.
Sure.
Just to that particular point, and this may be a question that's better directed to the land use review board, but do you have any information that it is not gonna be completed on time? Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do.
is the bridge is an extension necessary? Like, is your sense that they're behind?
So a lot of these extensions were proposed in collaboration with the then Natural Resources Board, a lot of the same staff. I can't speak for the LURB,
Right.
but what I'll also say is, and I think it may be important for y'all to get the RPCs in here, because the RPCs, I trust to meet all of their deadlines. I believe the RPCs will meet their deadlines. But it is also a reality that I don't think a lot of communities will have received the guidance, been able to go through the application process and get their areas approved by the last day of 2026. Some communities likely will, but for a lot of communities, that's gonna be a tight turnaround, and so it's likely that, particularly for much of 2027, there's gonna be a lot of areas where there's a gap. Their interim exemptions will have expired and they don't yet have that. And that's assuming, as I do, the RPCs meet all of their deadlines.
It's interesting, thinking about the timeline, and that inevitably there will be some communities that are like on it.
Exactly.
And have their application and are ready to go. And then there may be this tail naturally of communities that get their application in and get that done over time. But anyway,
It's like students handing in paper.
Right. It's definitely work.
And following that analogy, I mean, think about the students or municipalities who might have a harder time because of constraints. We know they can check all those 1B boxes, we know they can do it, but they might be taking a little longer than some of our other partners. I'm from Shelburne. Shelburne's gonna have a lot of resources to make it happen in time. But I've also lived in, well, Alpha's not a good example, they don't have zoning, but I've also lived in small towns who are gonna have a harder time getting there. We all want to make sure that they have a shot too.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. It's a good conversation. Okay. Now, expanding the areas of the interim exemption. So again, this is separate, but paired with the extension of the timeline. The goal of this is to try to match with the density provisions in the home act that follow wastewater service areas, and I think you can see a lot of examples. I was hoping to come today, I'll send afterward, I was hoping to come today with some maps, where you see a lot of municipalities. St. Johnsbury is a great example where you've got the designated area, and then you've got the buffer, so that accounts for our interim exemption area. And then there's a wastewater line that goes far out beyond that buffer area. And it seems like a natural fit that we would continue to include that, because the Home Act density provisions apply there. We would want to also apply the interim exemptions in those areas. So that's what this proposal tries to achieve. Following that same logic, looking at the transit routes, there was a sort of a population threshold that was designated in order to try to establish, what types of areas and popular transit routes are we talking about here? And as folks recall, there was really just a couple of lines within Chittenden County that were able to fall under that particular interim exemption. We are proposing, and again, deferring some extent to the LURB's expertise to define exactly which transit routes or which areas are included in this interim exemption, but proposing to remove that. It was a 50,000 population proposal, or what's in statute right now, to remove that, so that more areas such as the Route 2 corridor or portions of the Route 2 corridor would fall under that interim exemption. So this is really just giving other areas outside of Chittenden County an opportunity to benefit from that interim exemption that's already on the books. All right. Some of these governance provisions, you're already going to hear the land use review board talking about, but so I'm largely going to steer clear of them, but I'll just say the public meeting law adjustment and mirroring what the public utility commissions adhere to is, I think, the best way to make sure that a full-time 5-person board can actually operationally work together. It's going to be really tricky, and I'm just thinking of managing my department. Those folks have a comparable sized department. It's going to be really, really hard if anytime the 5 of them walk into the same room, they could be violating public meeting law. So the exemption currently in place for the public utility commissions, I think, is pretty thoughtful and would allow them to continue to operate. They don't need me to carry water for them. I'm sure they'll make the case to perhaps this committee and outcomes. So. All right. So I'm going to touch now on a couple of the changes to the 2A and B areas. What I'll say here is I think these are starting points for a conversation to make these areas more attainable. This is a suite of proposals to adjust the requirements for obtaining a Tier 1A designation. I'll also say that the date extension in here and the date extensions throughout the bill for some of these timing concerns were proposed by then the NRB. I don't know if the LURB has weighed in since then on some of these date extensions, some of these operational date extensions, but I'll let them speak to that. But as far as the second and third bullets, this is reducing some of the requirements in the Tier 1A thresholds to try to make this more attainable to certain communities. What I'll also say about that B1F and B1G, I think there are other ways to approach this conversation within the existing language, change a couple words here and there that would largely achieve the same thing, but keep those provisions in place so that folks know that it's they're still there. We can just make it a little bit more attainable. But the biggest one that I really want to highlight here that I think is an equity issue is that last bullet point, which adding something really to borrowing from something that's already in the Tier 1B thresholds, which is allowing RPCs or other contracted assistance to serve as a capacity to meet the requirements of Tier 1A. There are a few communities throughout the state that it is clear would be able to check all of even the existing boxes of Tier 1A, but they're likely going to be constrained by this if we aren't allowing them to bring in either the RPC or other contracted assistance. So this would open up possibilities for a few more communities to obtain a tier 1A. Again, this is something you could do and keep all the other requirements in place and would still enable several more communities to come on board. Any questions on that before I move on?
I don't even know what to ask at this point. I can't remember all the tiers.
I know.
It's like set, so.
Yeah, maybe we should do like,
I know we did, I was like, I
Yeah.
feel like we've gotten this testimony, but I don't have it in my head and I'm gonna ask questions.
well, I do have a question on this, for the allowing other contracted assistance. Are you envisioning, cause the tier 1A, just for fun, is that's like the biggest areas. Yeah, so,
Okay.
it would be like Burlington's and Montpelier's and it's not even necessarily the whole area, it's just the places that are the most dense.
Okay.
And well, and served by water and sewer
That's right.
and they have zoning, they have to prove that they have a whole suite of zoning bylaws that largely meet, so you know, that this is yet to be fully spelled out, but that largely meet the requirements of Act 250. And so they have the capacity to administer
That's
all of that zoning.
Might be helpful if we're gonna dig into this more, to have like a cheat sheet and a map that we can post on the wall.
Do you mean
I
like an example map?
Well, in
Or-
finance, for example, we have all these different maps, you probably do in ed too, like school district possibilities.
Oh, I see.
You know, so we can visualize them, it would be nice to have that for this. If that exists, I think it does in electronic form, then a cheat sheet of what the tiers are.
Well, because I think we could have a,
I love something.
well, the interim maps.
Oh, right,
Is
it's
it?
not something, yeah.
Exactly, and I think the tier 1A stuff is not even. The rules aren't even out yet for how somebody would apply, so we don't have a map. We probably have some guesses as to where some areas might be, but that's about it.
So clear
Yeah.
that this is like a tier community.
Yeah. We're all about tiers in this.
Your cheat sheet actually gets one page in the bill, basically.
That would be great.
It's listed under the 1A requirements are listed, it's pretty concise.
Okay,
I don't remember where it is, but I know it's there.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just like,
okay, that would be helpful to have some
Yeah,
nice colors.
Yeah, we can work on that. And maybe, so given that, sounds like more context is needed, I pulled up the language that we're talking about, adjusting or in this case striking. Without the broader context, I'm not sure this really helps, but so just to clarify, so F and G are these two provisions that we're talking about, so basically requiring that the municipality and their zoning bylaws taken into account. In F, it's historic preservation provisions, and HP does fall under my department, so again, sensitive to this. And then G, that they plan for the maintenance of significant natural resources. Again, I'd say in both of these, there are ways to achieve something very similar with just changing a couple of key words that maybe just don't necessarily align with other pieces of statute, where this could just be a little bit more clear and attainable. Okay. All right, so cheat sheet is gonna be helpful here. These I think are easier to follow without a cheat sheet. So this is a big discussion, last year, should 1B areas be automatically mapped and awarded to tier 1B eligible communities and those tier 1B eligible areas within the municipalities? Or should a municipality have to take some action to ask for this area to be mapped and to participate as tier 1B community? The administration, in my recollection, and sort of the volley back and forth, the Senate actually agreed that it should be an automatic, you're automatically participating if you're tier 1B eligible, and you automatically have your tier 1B area. The final bill did not include that, so the language in the bill says that municipalities have to take an action to opt in to participate and actually to have their tier 1B area mapped is the language. So we have a proposal in here to essentially just strike that language to enable these communities who are eligible and whose areas can be mapped, for that to just be automatic. And enabling communities who don't want to participate by simple vote of their select board or city council, just to opt out. Okay, so that's tier 1B. Now, these next two provisions are relevant to tier 1B areas and then tier 1B eligible areas. So as a reminder, in tier 1B, the exemption is for 50 units, 50 units residential, but it's also includes mixed use. Now, for these areas that do end up participating in tier 1B, we're proposing to, I'm starting with the second bullet here, to enable those to go up to 75 units if they build a priority housing project. So what this means is if they have this affordability component that meets the requirements under PHP, they would actually be able to exceed that 50 unit and go up to 75. Again, so this is a way for us to incentivize more affordable housing through the regulatory system. There was a big concern last year that under this new tiered structure, perhaps there'd be a decrease in incentives to build affordable housing unless communities seek on their own to adopt inclusionary zoning. So this should be a provision to give an incentive
We have
there.
a couple of questions, maybe, Consider Harding.
Okay, so again, I'm still learning all this, but going from 50 to 75 units, is that within like an apartment building, or is that individual structures? And is there a land mass requirement within there so that there's essentially a density requirement?
Yeah, so it would meet all the current requirements under priority housing project.
Okay,
And so generally speaking, I believe project area and parcel are not necessarily the same in sense, so I can get a more defined or a clear definition of PHP for you. There's a flow chart that they can send to the committee that is actually very helpful, but so it would be one project, it would be 75 units.
okay,
But again, it would require that affordability component, which is not required in the 50 unit exception under tier 1B that exists.
oh, okay. Okay,
So just to go.
yeah, I know you know a lot about this.
One of the byproducts of what we did here was that it kind of eliminated indirectly and not by design, but it eliminated the rationale for priority housing projects because of the 50 being available to anybody, which is also what's available for priority housing projects. They lost the kind of advantage that they had to build affordable housing. So that is true, and that's the rationale that you're advocating here to go from 50 to 75 for priority housing projects.
That's
That's why I understand the rationale.
Yes.
All kinds of considerations, but I understand the rationale.
So the question here,
Do these tiers anywhere correlate with the tiers in the Act 59 that the GHCP was supposed to have a map
do you need the 30
for the
by
conservation design?
the 30 by 30, 50 by
Right.
50? I think that was to be.
So you're thinking about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. No, they're not. They're kind of, they would be in tier 1. They are something. They're not directly related, but they would be.
What have they been,
Different tiers.
have they been identified already in a map?
And I think that would also apply to tier 3. Right, the conservation.
Tier 3 wouldn't have any housing.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Or that there would be. The threshold is different, right? That like you could, it's not a prohibition, it's like it might not be 10 houses in 10 acres in 10 years, or whatever, I've got that, I said that wrong, but
It would just be subject to.
it would be subject to a different review.
I would like to see a political cartoon that has like the tiers of the three things, the renewable energy tiers, these tiers, those tiers, and trying to like all math.
And then somebody trying to understand it.
Tier better.
Most of us last year. Maybe some of our media partners can make that cartoon happen.
I think, we have a comment here from.
So I can just share, there is a map of the Act 59 30 by 30. The first phase of that was to conduct an inventory of existing conserved lands. There is a map that shows the 3 different categories, or the 4 different categories of lands that are conserved. There, I believe, Alex, is also a map of the Act 181 interim eligible, interim
Yes.
exemption area.
That's right.
And there's also the planning atlas that shows the state. So those things do exist. They haven't been kind of superimposed, but we could probably figure that out.
That's what I'm, it would simplify it for me, pretty simple.
Absolutely, and we should say, I think the hope, or at least what I hear from a lot of RPCs is the interim exemptions. Will likely not be the exact same areas as the tier 1A and 1B areas. In some cases, there will just be different parcels, and in a lot of cases, I think tier 1A and 1B areas may actually be larger than the interim exemption areas. Just because the mapping is gonna be a lot more targeted than big ones, but those maps, I think. Would certainly be helpful for this committee just to look at anyway, the existing maps.
Thank you.
Do you love math?
Thank you, Senator. Yes.
Need more maps.
So I started with the last bullet point, and I'm going back to the second bullet point here, which is paired with that, which is in areas that are tier 1B eligible, but choose to take that municipal action to opt out. We would still in those areas propose to make priority housing projects up to 50 units eligible in those areas. So you can opt out of sort of the broad exemption, the broader tier 1B framework, but in those areas, we're still making these projects permissible up to 50 units where you're just exempted from Act 250 under the standing priority housing project statute. So this, in some ways you could view this, I think some municipalities may view this as a reason to then say participate in tier 1B, because if we were to include this provision, then they see, well, regardless, if this area is eligible for tier 1B and we opt out, we could still get up to 50 units, but it would be a priority housing project and have this affordability component. So we may as well opt in. Thus, sort of that last bullet point where it says, okay, great, you've opted in. Now, projects with the affordability component could actually go up to 75 units. So it's effectively an affordability bonus of 50%.
Question here, yes.
So just a comment, I was involved with some housing working groups in the Rutland district. And one of the developers that were there said, if we could get 75 units instead of 50, it would be easier to get a contractor to come in to do it. Rather than doing, 5, I think at one time it was, 5 units in a certain area. And
Yeah.
so this is kind of, important things actually.
Certainly, the object here is to try to focus these in areas where there's already infrastructure, but also where scale is so key for driving down the per unit cost and for getting the workforce. Thank you for that, Senator. Okay, any further questions on these three provisions? Okay, and I'll just say, so these three, these respect the existing structure of tiers 1A and 1B as laid out. This is not proposing any substantive, I'd say maybe not substantive, not proposing any structural changes to what passed last year. This is ways to sort of strengthen the housing components of it. All right, and we come to this slide. So sort of consistent with a lot of concerns that the administration expressed last session. And I say consistent with what the governor expressed in his veto message. This bill also includes provisions to scale back tier. So in the case of tier 3, rather than launching into rulemaking, keeping the working group in place, but rather making it a study of critical natural resource areas and striking HC rulemaking. So yeah, this would effectively take a step back and just turn tier 3 into a study.
And, sorry, maybe I should let you talk about the road rules, but.
Sure. Well, and so then there's also language in this to repeal the road rule, which is not entirely consistent. If folks recall, Senator Sears proposed an amendment which altered the road rule to remove the 800-foot component. This is not that is another route to go here. This is rather just striking it all together.
I have so many thoughts on
Me
this.
too.
So just for context, I mean, the way that we ended up with Act 181 was because it was a grand bargain, really. It was a lot of work to come together with diverse partners, and so to have The road rule proposed to be repealed. I mean, that goes against trying to protect forest blocks. There's ways to have development close to the road. We want clustered, high density developments. Do you have any logic for like, why do you need the road rule repealed? As opposed to just site it near the road?
What, the feedback we've heard, especially in rural areas, is there's concern about a sort of uncertainty. There's more clarity around what the road rules implications would be. There's more uncertainty around tier 3 because that rulemaking is yet to happen. The repeal of the road rule just follows the logic that, I'd say from the home building perspective, the housing advocate perspective, Act 250 in its current iteration has done a fairly great job of preserving our natural resource areas over the last several decades. And these provisions to strengthen it from the administration's perspective aren't entirely necessary.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not familiar with the grand bargain, who were the parties in the grand bargain?
Oh, gosh, there were so many, so. I mean, the chamber was in here a lot, so housing advocate, largely speaking, it was housing advocates and environmental advocates.
Snre Association, Chamber.
Yes, but also
I
like,
don't know. I'm guessing the governor wasn't part of the grand bargain because he vetoed.
that seems likely.
Okay, all right.
That's fair.
And I think it's a fair statement to say neither the governor nor many people who are now in the building were a party to that grand bargain.
Oh, I think there were people who were definitely a part of building that were a part of it as well. I mean, there were affordable housing advocates here as well, so.
Sure, I just mean newly elected senators and representatives.
I mean, I was not on the committees of jurisdiction, but I know you testified a lot in your department, and so because you're the governor's representative in the building, to that extent, the governor was involved. Maybe he didn't like the end result, but his people were part of it.
I also just want to thank you.
Yeah.
I know I'm like putting it on here, like I just wanted to raise the context of like how we arrived at this point.
I think that's important context. I think it's true. I like to think everyone from the administration that was asked to testify at every stage advocated against these provisions. So this is logically consistent. I'll say I'm not diminishing the work of other parties that pulled this together. I'll just say nobody from the administration at any point came in and advocated in support of these provisions.
Which provisions, these two that are on?
These two.
Okay, just be clear.
Thank you, Senator. That's a great point. And it is an important point to just acknowledge that these two provisions are, I think it's fair to say, in a separate category than the rest of what I presented today. This is really adjusting the balance, and the governor has talked a lot about making sure that that balance that was being struck last year is right, and that's what the intent is with these two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe that is everything. We talked about these. Okay, that's everything that I have for you today. And I believe I know my homework, so some summaries and perhaps maps.
Maps are good.
Okay,
Super.
thank you all for having me.
Thank you. It's helpful but particularly for somebody who is, day, into housing out and just what the needs are, so.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
Sure,
Thank you. Okay, with that team, my goodness, we are ahead of schedule. That is fabulous. Don't forget to interview your gubernatorial appointees. Have I started yet? No, I have not. So
Next week is a good week to do it.
Next week is a good week to do it. I'm saying this to remind myself as well.